Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. I am so grateful you're here today, and I'm so excited to talk to our guest. Her name is Kim. She lives in Annapolis, Maryland, and she's a certified running and health coach. And although she herself isn't personally plant-based, she is married to a plant-based eater. And so I thought it would be really helpful for you to kind of hear her side of the story and what was helpful for her and even her husband as he transitioned, and she didn't fully transition to plant-based. So she's the primary cook, she's the primary shopper, food shopper. So I think it'll be really cool to hear her story. And also too, she has helped him with his goals over the last 7 years, which included doing 2 Ironmans, which I think is incredible. So we'll definitely touch on that as well. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Hello there, everybody. And Ashley, thank you so much for having me join you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk from the other side of things.
Yes, I think this will be so helpful because there are a lot of people listening right now who maybe they themselves are going plant-based, maybe their partner isn't. So I think it'll be helpful to hear what you found helpful when your hubby transitioned, and to just, I think it'll just give us a different perspective, which I think will be really helpful too. And especially like the Ironman and training piece. I know there's some athletes who listen to the show as well, so that'll be really helpful. But definitely, take us back to sort of the beginning when the transition sort of took place.
Sure. Yes. So, oh gosh, it's been a while now. I want to say it's been like 7 or 8 years, maybe a little bit more. I actually kind of spurred the conversation because at the time I was working in events for a local SPCA, and I was saying, moral, ethical kind of things like, I'm trying to help save these animals, but then we're turning around and eating them and like all that kind of jazz. And so he actually is in the medical field, and he was noticing all of the reports coming out about hormones and medications and all that kind of stuff. And so we made the transition actually together to doing plant-based, and we did it together for about a year. I had some medical complications that brought back in meat for me, but he has stayed with it and stuck to it now. He still is, plant-based. We do some fish, or at least he does, but it's not necessarily a frequent thing. But yeah, he's been plant-based now for, almost 8 years. And
that's amazing.
Yep. And in that, we've learned to fuel 2 different Ironman races that he's done. And that's only 2 fulls. He's done multiple 70.3s, multiple marathons, he just like a lot of endurance events.
Okay.
So
70.3 isn't even a full.
No, that's a half.
Wow. Y'all. Wow. That's 70.3 miles, right? Total.
Yes. So that's with the swim, the bike, and the run. So it just means he just did a half marathon instead of a full marathon.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So 70.3 would be, was it double that for a full?
So full is 140. Yeah.
Woo, wow. That's impressive. That's amazing. And I know that's a commitment, and it's a commitment for you because you're, like we said, you're the primary like food shopper and the cook. And so that's a lot of pressure on you to make sure he's being fed.
Yes. So because like I say, he's done 2 Ironmans, but you have to understand, like, that's just race day. So there's a significant amount of training that leads up to it. I mean, we're talking multiple 4 to 6 hour bike rides, multiple long runs, multiple swims. And this is just in a week. The race is actually like the culmination of all the training. So you're talking about like 4, maybe 6 months worth of training to get to that 140 or that 70.3 worth of eating and cooking and shopping and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to dive into that. But first, I want to highlight the fact that, you said that you and your hubby transitioned to plant-based, kind of at the same time. And I like that you highlighted the fact that like you had some medical issues arise. And so you sort of had to pivot things a little bit. And I know that you still eat tons of plants now, but also you just kind of had to shift gears. And I think that for anyone listening, I think it's really helpful that when we look at plant-based eating, first of all, that we are very open-minded to everyone's journey, because everybody's journey is their own personal journey. It's highly individualized. And also too, that we don't approach plant-based eating like it has to be very black and white. Like we don't have to put plant-based eating into a box. It really can look like anything, and it's defined by the individual. I mean, that's what I strongly believe. So I like him that you highlighted that, the fact that like, he's still plant-based, but you kind of had to shift things a little bit for you just because you had some issues arise. And I think that's great to highlight.
I don't force him to try and have meat, and he doesn't force me to try and not have it in the house or whatnot. Not that he'd have any control over it because I'm the one that does the shopping and whatnot. And I will say that like going into getting my nutrition certification, I'm actually a primal health coach, because the basis of the primal diet is really, vegetables and fruits and all of that kind of stuff. So there's not the only big difference between the diet that I am working with and that he's doing is that I may add some meat onto it. The rest of it is fairly like whole food, plant-based. There's just an added protein difference to it. So like where he's getting his protein from beans and lentils and that kind of stuff, I'm just getting it from, fish or chicken kind of standpoint.
Yeah. And I like what you said as well, that you both have sort of a mutual respect for one another when it comes to how you eat, which I think is really important, especially when there is kind of just a little bit of a division in the way that like partners eat in the household. It is really helpful to have that like core mutual respect for one another with how they're eating. Like you said, you're not forcing him to eat meat. He's not forcing you to not eat meat. There's a mutual respect, which I think is helping both of you be very successful throughout, your own journeys as well.
It is, absolutely. And I won't say that it's not without its struggles. Like when it kind of, there are times where things are busy or, I'm training for something or he's training for something. And it's just like, for the love of God, like, could this just be easier? Like if I could just make the same thing, because it took a learning curve to have to realize that I had to plan out basically bases of things, and then I would put mine on top of it. So it's like when I'm planning food for the week, it's like, okay, are we doing salads here? Are we doing veggies here? Are we doing tacos? And it's things like I will make faux beef crumbles and then I'll have a pan of ground beef going. And like, if you look in our fridge at any given time, there are things that are labeled that's like ground beef, like don't eat that. It's really about planning out, for all intents and purposes, the sides. So it's like, okay, are we doing salads? Are we doing fries? Are we doing veggies? Are we doing fruits? It's like figuring all of that out and then going on top of it with, okay, what protein am I adding for him? What protein am I adding for me? What things can be shared throughout the week? What am I eating that looks the same as his, or what do I need to like substitute in and out? And so that's kind of how my grocery shopping looks like when I sit down and plan out the week. It's like, okay, what are all the different proteins? What are all the different bases? Like, how does this going to look? What's in the fridge? And then I have to go back and go, okay, what is he going to eat without my knowledge? That's going to screw this up. Because we did have a point where like, he's training so much that he's just kind of grazing and hungry all the time. And so I had to figure that out, because I would come back and he would have had like a hamburger on a bun, and then he would have eaten another bun. And I'm like, I didn't do the math for you to just eat a roll.
I love that. And I love that you're highlighting the fact that like what is also helpful. Like, first of all, it doesn't come without its challenges, which I also think is important to know. And that you find help, because you are the primary food shopper and planner and all that you find it very helpful to kind of create those bases for both of you. So some similarities there, and then just kind of add in different like proteins or different sides that kind of complement what it is that you're doing.
The way he grazes and, I have to eat too, you could spend a lot of money just buying a whole lot of stuff that maybe doesn't get consumed. And there was that learning curve in the beginning to be like, okay, well, did I just buy this bag of spring mix so that I could toss it out later, because we forget that it's in there in and amongst everything else. So it's been a learning curve of like, what can I make that we can both eat? Well, and not that I can't eat what he is, but what can, like, if I'm making veggie burgers, how many do I need to make so that we both have something? It's figuring out how your partner also eats. And it sounds like that's something simple, but it's like, I've learned over the years that if it's not labeled and he can't see it, he won't eat it. In our fridge, I actually learned that you can use like the paint pens on the plastic containers and just wash them off, because it'll say things like strawberries, blueberries, hard-boiled eggs, because he won't pull them out to like see what's in it. If he can see that like something's already prepped there and he doesn't have to cook it, because he's not somebody that cooks things if he doesn't have to, he will pull the easiest thing out. And it's like, I would realize that things were disappearing. And I was like, okay, so now I have to know, like, we have a conversation about, okay, I've prepped this, this, and this for you for lunches this week. And like everything, this is what it is, because things would go bad because he just wouldn't like look for the blueberries.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So that communication piece is like super helpful as well.
Yes, it is super helpful. And knowing how your partner is eating or how your family is eating, because I mean, he is a big kid, but you know, we don't have children, but from what I've seen, it's like, you know, you do all this planning for your kids to like grab things and do that. And I just started realizing that, oh, I could put some of those techniques into play with my husband so that I knew what was in the fridge. He knew what was in the fridge. And there wasn't like this constant miscommunication of what was available to eat, what was something that was prepped for a meal later this week, and all of that kind of fun. So it's like figuring out the systems that work for you and your partner and how you can implement them to be easiest.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's super helpful. And the paint, you said paint pen on the plastic.
It's something I saw on Instagram at some point. There's a white paint pen that I got from like Michael's, and you can write on the plastic and then you just have to scrub it off. Like that's with awesome. Water. You don't have to.
Yes. Oh, that's great.
Like I bought the containers, I think from like Marshall's or whatever. So there's like the certain containers for like berries and eggs and all that kind of stuff. And so it's labeled on there and they're stacked in the fridge so that they can stack one above each other. I'm so screwed when the Container Store actually opens in a neighborhood near me. But they're all labeled like strawberries, hard-boiled eggs, carrot sticks, baby carrots, like all the different things. So like both he and I know where everything is, but we can just kind of reach in and grab. And it's all about creating an ease. So like we have the Echo Show in the kitchen, and he knows that like when he eats something and it runs out, that he adds it to the shopping list. All he has to vocally say is, you know, Alexa, add carrot sticks to the shopping list, so that he doesn't have to write it down. I don't forget that I don't not know that it's empty when we're going. So it's like that kind of ease of stuff has really made a huge difference in our ability to communicate about what he needs to eat and what I'm buying and cooking and eating myself.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, again, that's just another helpful tip for you who are listening is like, when you run out of something, seriously, write it down immediately or tell Alexa immediately, because you're bound to forget, or you just have to go back and look through your cupboards and your pantry and your fridge, freezer. So yeah, do it first thing if it runs out, and then you're kind of good to go. You don't have to think about it. It's out of your mind.
Right. And it like, I feel like the paper gets lost or like we forget to write it down. And I will tell you, like adding that little tool into the kitchen has been great, because either one of us knows that like when you, because it's right behind the fridge, like when you pull something out and you're like, oh, this is, you know, this is the end of it. You just say, Alexa, add milk to my shopping list, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
And it just automatically appears there, and I can kind of go through it instead of having to like be like, oh, did I remember if this was out or not?
Yep. Yeah. Amazing.
This has suddenly become not a plant-based conversation, but
hey, I know all of us can learn how to be more efficient in the kitchen and with our planning and our prepping. So this is really, really helpful.
I know that we talked about when you were on my podcast was No Meat Athlete. And that has been a huge thing. That movement and that book was coming out right as he kind of started his endurance fun while being plant-based. And so that's a book that I still use to this day and to try and figure it out. And it's really about, because he's plant-based, it's making sure that he's fueling properly while he is doing his workouts. So I don't worry so much about like what kind of calories he's getting, what kind of protein. I mean, like, I know there's a, you know, overfed and underfueled kind of thing, but I really don't worry about that with him so much. But because he's taking in so much during trainings, it's hard to calculate that kind of number, because it's hard to calculate, okay, how much is he expending versus how much is he taking in? Like I let him do his own fueling math to be like, okay, you figure out how much you're taking in while you're working out versus how much you're expending. And then there's always stuff within the house that he can add on for snack wise, add on protein shakes and, the different proteins in the fridge and the different foods and everything. So it's like, he's got to kind of figure that part out, because I can buy everything and I can put it all out there, but I cannot control how much he intakes.
Sure.
Or doesn't intake, but more so than not, it ends up being a grazing thing. And and he's just constantly eating.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Especially when you're expending that much. I think it's good to highlight that as well. Like when you are at that high of a level, especially working out, like you kind of have to be a bit more calculated in what it is that you're eating, because things can get a little wonky, electrolyte wise, or even just, endurance wise. Like if he's going out and running, 20, 30 miles, which I can't even imagine, like you got to really properly fuel for that, because your body is expending a lot, which means it's going to need a lot to keep going.
it's a lot. They're intaking a lot. And, he was supposed to do a 70.3 actually in 2020. And obviously that didn't happen. So it was actually more of a challenge to figure out how he should eat normally.
Yeah.
Because it started off where he was still training, and then as like 2020 progressed and it was obvious that like things weren't going to happen, like it dialed back for the first time in a couple of years. So, he took breaks, but they were breaks for like a month or two, and like your body doesn't change too much in that amount of time. But when you start adding like 3, 4, it's like, okay, now we have to figure out how you eat as not an endurance person.
Yeah. And how did that go?
It has been trying for him.
Yeah.
Because he's so used to having so many calories, that to then dial back and have to figure out like how to eat to a hunger cue. In all honesty, exercise is it's an appetite suppressant. And we have to make sure that we're consuming enough calories based on how we're outputting. And so then it's been a method of trying to get him to remember food cues.
Yeah.
Like, am I hungry or am I bored? Am I hungry or am I just kind of, a little depressed because we've been indoors all the time? And it's like trying to figure out physical versus emotional cues, because he's just been so used to having to eat regardless of whether or not he was hungry, because he knew he needed the fuel, but now he doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's great for the athletes listening who are taking a period of time off, or even for someone who hasn't really tapped into the difference between maybe some sort of emotional eating or boredom eating versus like true hunger eating. It can be tough to recognize, well, what is my body trying to tell me? Or how does my body tell me that I'm hungry? Because it's not always just like your stomach growling. It can present itself in multiple ways. So I think that's a really good point of like, how can we get, for your husband, especially, but and for anyone listening, how can we get back in touch with those cues so that we can kind of respond accordingly and recognize that difference?
Right. And that's what we've actually been working on probably the last, what is it? Mid-May. So probably the last like 6 to 8 months has been working with him and like talking about, and that's again, the communication point. Like, are you hungry? How hungry are you? Am I buying enough? Am I buying too much? Like, how does it adjust how we shop and how we do things? Because he's trying to figure out now those cues and communicate them to me so that we're not wasting food, but that we're not also under buying. It's been a fun like 6-8 months figuring out how to do that all again. And of course, I say all of this knowing full well that probably in the next month or so he's going to go back to ramping up that training, and it will have been, not that it's for nothing, but he'll be able to go back to the typical boy who can start running again and will drop whatever weight he's gained and be able to eat whatever he wants and not have to worry about anything.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and how has your training, because you are a run coach and a health coach, but how has your training maybe even helped him, or how do you even help like your athletes or your clients that you work with sort of throughout this?
Yeah. So I will say there was actually, and when we talk about communication, there was a big struggle at the height of his Ironman training, because it felt like I was doing everything for him. And I was having to figure out how to make all the food, how to do my full-time job, how to do my training while he's out doing 6-hour bike rides and 3-hour runs and all this time in the pool. And so like the first time around, I was like, all right, this is your goal. Like, I've got you. And then the second one, it was like, okay, how are you serving you? Because this is now your goal. It's not mine.
Yeah.
And we had to have that real honest conversation about how his goals don't supersede mine. And I can't constantly be serving him. Like, it needs to be a balance. And so that was a conversation because we're both, I mean, I'm not doing nearly the amount of training that he is, but it was a thing of like, we had to figure out like, okay, how can you clean your own bottles? Like, how can you help me around the house? How can you not be skipping out on that day-to-day stuff just because you've chosen to have this goal or this activity? So it's really about finding that balance so that there wasn't a negative connotation to anybody's training or anybody's, you know, what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that now plays into the athletes I'm coaching with, like, being open and honest with your partner, because maybe they're not a runner, maybe they're not an endurance person, maybe they don't understand why you're doing this, but you have to find that life balance in what you're doing. How can you still be a supportive partner while, you know, achieving your goals? How can you still, you know, be getting the stuff done at home and at work that you need to do while you're, you know, doing what's good for your body and doing your movement and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of taking those lessons that I learned from him and now being able to apply that to the athletes that I'm working with.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I love that you highlighted the fact that like, if he has goals, you have goals, it's not like either are more important than one another, but how can we both have goals simultaneously and work toward them without maybe compromising, you know, the other person's goals or whatever. I think that's great that you highlighted that, because I know a lot of people listening can relate to that.
I distinctly remember a moment looking at him and being like, look, we need to figure this out, because I feel like my endurance goals and my running and everything are coming second to yours, because we also have to, you know, make sure the house doesn't become a cluster and that our food is being made and that everything is still working and running the way it's supposed to. And we don't have kids. So it's like, you know, there's not even that distraction that a lot of folks have. So it was being really open and honest and say like, and he didn't even realize he was doing it.
Sure.
Because
yeah.
who thinks about like, oh, how is this affecting my partner because I'm going out for, you know, a training run. And so those conversations were had like, hey, we have this planned for Saturday night. I know you have a 4-hour bike ride, but these are the things I need you to get done. This is the time you need to be ready, because we're going to go do this. And we can't stop doing couple things just because you're doing an Ironman. So it was a give and a take. And it was definitely like learning to like go over our schedules for the week and do the planning. And so it's meal planning and it's schedule planning and it's communication. And so there's more to being a plant-based athlete than just being like, I'm going to have salad every day.
100%. And can we just also highlight the fact that there's a big misconception out there that, you know, there's maybe a detriment to eating plant-based and being an athlete, but it sounds like that does not, obviously he breaks that mold and you break that mold.
When you're plant-based, you have to eat more.
Yep.
And it's counterintuitive to kind of everything that you're seeing. And it can be harder as your body adjusts because the sheer volume is more. And nobody wants to eat 6 cups of lentils.
Right.
Like it's not it's not ideal. It's not what you want to do, but it's very, very filling and you get full fast, but it's not necessarily, you still need more.
Yep.
So it's like your stomach fills and your mind fills, but like you still need the calories. And so that's why, you know, actually grazing was better because it allowed his system to take in nutrients little by little, as opposed to trying to do it in like a 3-meal scenario where he would just be fuller faster. I have this like chickpea sriracha burger that I make that's fantastic, but it's got zucchini in it. It's got a lot of chickpeas. It's got peanut butter. It's got oats. So it's like, it met a lot of the nutritional needs, but you could eat 1 or 2 of them and it doesn't seem like you're taking in a whole lot of food, because of course you could eat, you know, 4 cups of kidney beans, but do you really want to eat 4 cups of kidney beans? Like more power to you, but It just doesn't sound appetizing.
Yep. And two, it's like, yeah, you do not have to stick to that sort of stereotype of eating 3 meals a day too. You just kind of have to find what works for you. And for your hubby in particular, and even you sometimes, like grazing just worked better because he was able to get in more food that his body needed to sustain this high level of endurance that he was going through.
Right. And I say grazing in the fact that like it was whole food based. So like he's not sitting there grazing on Pringles and donuts and all those different types of things. Like the intake are more whole food based than they are necessarily just general calorie intake.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've been working on over the years is as the research comes out, it's like, it's so easy to fall into this like dirty plant-based where it's like a lot of processed plant-based kind of stuff. And then you're not, it's like, oh, well, I'm eating plant-based, but you're not getting the nutrients because it's not real, so to speak. It's been a journey of cleaning up that and becoming more whole food plant-based as opposed to just this like dirty plant-based kind of thing where it was like you're just eating to eat. It's still junk. Like as we learn more and more about it.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a good point. Cause I think when we're also like intuitive and like you're going back to like even listening to hunger cues, when we're listening to our body and we give ourselves that permission to eat a donut or eat like banana with peanut butter, more often than not, we're going to choose the banana and peanut butter because that's just what our body naturally wants when we're listening. But every once in a while, we're going to want to eat that donut because it looks freaking delicious. So, but
right? Of course.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pizza. Like I can tell where he's at in training by like how much pizza he can crush in a sitting.
Sure. Well, Kim, so many great tips for everyone listening. And I really, really do appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing your side of things and how you fuel this plant-based athlete. And two, I love the fact that you highlighted just the communication piece, the planning piece, like so many great tips, because I think, I mean, I know I learned a lot, but it's just always helpful to be reminded of these types of things, like even communication with your partner, like that's really helpful to be reminded of. So yeah,
absolutely. And for those that are listening, I do want to say that like, I was not a run coach or a health coach when I was doing this with him. I was just like everybody else that went and got a book from Barnes and Noble and like started to figure out how to do this. So, and that's kind of what led me into the run coaching and the nutrition coaching and that kind of stuff. But when you're listening, if you're like, oh, well, they're a coach, they understand. No. I had to learn all of this by trial and error, just like everybody else.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, if anyone wants to reach out to you online, definitely tell us where we can head to say hi and ask you a question or two.
You can find me mostly on Instagram. It's the Kim Teter. And I share all this kind of stuff that I'm doing mostly in my stories, and you'll see random kitchen kind of fun there. Or if you're interested in learning how I fuel, I've recently started playing on TikTok, same handle. And I'm learning about it more and more every day. Yeah. So if you want to connect or if you have any questions, please feel free to message me. I'm happy to answer any questions if you're struggling with any of this kind of stuff. So please reach out.
Yeah. Definitely reach out to Kim. She's fantastic. And she's a great run coach, she's a great health coach. So, and she puts up some really funny stuff too, which I appreciate.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Thank you all for listening.
Until next time, keep thriving.